Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a big approach.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 552 for September 18th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. We are on the verge of doing our next retrospective.
It's a journey. On the journey.
Been following the show for some time. This is something we do every year where we take a year and we talk about it in its entirety. We often do a review, a movie that we think defines the year in some way. And then we offer up our top 20 movies of that year, really digging into our top 5 specifically. And we are now at the year 2001. We've been counting backwards, and we have reached the year 2001.
Good year.
Which turns out is a really good year for movies. Really good year. In fact...
go ahead, JD. Keep going.
I was just going to say, it might be a little underrated. I don't know if this is the case, but it feels to me anyway that when you talk about the best movie years, what is often brought up is 1939, 1976, 1994, 1999, 2007 are years that are often brought up. 2001, I feel like anyway, should be in that conversation a lot more than it is.
I think it probably should be, but at the same time, maybe it's because it was such a formative year for you and I, given our respective ages. So maybe there is a little bit of a bias. Yeah, it might be a bit biased, but I feel like this is also one of those years that we're doing on one of these retrospectives where we're noticing more films that are sort of being reevaluated as time has gone on. And I think there's more of that in 2001 by comparison to some of these other years we've talked about. So maybe that's also the case.
Yeah, I think that is very fair. I do think some of it absolutely comes down to us forming our cinephile identities with much of the movies that came out in 2001. However, when you take a step back and you look at the movies that came back here, I do think there is a level of objectivity to it. I don't think it's just our nostalgia with these movies. I think there's truly a lot of greatness to it, especially when you offer up those reconsiderations that you're talking about. And I do think that some of these films have reformed themselves over the last 20 years.
And I think maybe that's the better way to put it, as far like maybe not calling them re-evaluations, but more of like a reformation, because many of these movies that we will talk about, and I'll reference one specifically here just as an example. I don't want to talk about it too much because it could potentially end up on one of our lists, but a movie like Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's 11 was always a well-received film from that year, right? But I feel like just given the landscape of blockbuster filmmaking and fun filmmaking, heist filmmaking, big ensemble cast with such movie star energy, something has made that film even grow in stature even more. I guess that's an example of one, because that was never disliked. But it's only gotten better. I think most of these movies have just been aging like fine wine.
Absolutely.
I think this year is very representative of that.
I agree. Similarly, Fellowship of the Ring is one of those movies that will always be regarded as one of the best blockbusters ever made. And it was nominated for Best Picture. It was really great. People loved it at the time. People love it now.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's also one of those movies that, because of blockbuster filmmaking of the last 10 years, how that movie was made is a miracle. And that does give it even more weight in that context.
About that. You know, when we did our Lord of the Rings movie series, something we talked about during our Fellowship of the Ring segment of that series was how the reason why those movies worked so well was that Peter Jackson wasn't really going out of his way to make a blockbuster, quote unquote blockbuster. He was making a serious epic film. It was more in align with something like, let's say, Ben-Hur or something like that. It had more of
Yes.
that classic Hollywood energy that only became such a blockbuster phenomenon that it set the precedent for what blockbuster filmmaking would ultimately become. And I
Mhm.
think that's what gave it such a sincerity that most movies that tried to copy it just didn't have. And
I agree.
there were a lot of trendsetters that we'll talk about in the year 2001.
I agree. I feel the same way about Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down. Say what you will
Yeah.
about the film, its politics. We may disagree there, and I think that's perfectly fair. But from a filmmaking perspective, that is a movie that is incredibly robust in its craftsmanship.
Oh, yeah.
It is really well done.
I mean,
Really
nominated for
well
Best
made.
Director. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, in context of how most modern blockbusters are made today, those like the Black Hawk Downs of the world seem like a rarity. Like,
Well-
they just don't come around that
We'll
often.
probably talk about this when we actually do our retrospective. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves,
Yeah,
but you're
which
talking
we
about.
are, I feel
But
like.
I mean, no, but you're
Or I am.
we have to talk about this now because it's already top of mind. You're talking about how robust the filmmaking is in a movie like Black Hawk Down, which Ridley Scott was nominated for Best Director for. You look at the nominees for Best Director. You have Ridley Scott for Black Hawk Down, Robert Altman for Gosford Park, Peter Jackson for The Fellowship of the Ring, David Lynch for Mulholland Drive, and who ends up winning the award? Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind.
Just insane.
Which, okay, now
Like,
A Beautiful Mind is a
wild.
movie I don't hate. I
Yeah,
overall
it's-
like
it's-
that movie.
it's fine, yeah.
But of those nominees, when you talk about what Best Director means, that's not right.
No,
That
it
is not
is
right.
truly wild. Absolutely insane. And nothing against Ron Howard. It is a perfectly adequate movie.
I mean,
But to be nominated for Best Director, that's one thing when in comparison to those guys in these specific movies. But to win, as you're noting there, is just
and Ron Howard's not a
insane.
bad director.
Yeah, no, it's
Then
fine.
again, like if you look at his career as a director, he's done much better physical directing work in movies like Rush, for instance, or
I was
Apollo
going to
13.
say-
Apollo 13 might be his best movie, if you ask me.
I think Rush or Apollo 13, flip a coin as far as I'm concerned. Those are both great movies. And I am pretending his win for A Beautiful Mind is really for one of those two.
two.
It was either in retrospect of we missed out for Apollo 13 or a future prediction of sometime 13 years from now, he's going to direct an F1 movie and it'll be for that instead.
Well, we also know how it works. Oh, I mean, actually, it's interesting. I was going to say we know how it works because usually a movie that ends up winning Best Picture is going to win either Best Director or at least one of the screenplay nominations, right? Either adapted or original screenplay. It could sometimes win all three of those, but it doesn't usually happen. And I was assuming that A Beautiful Mind won Best Director because it was going to win Best Picture and not win Best Screenplay, but it also won Best Screenplay. So,
Yeah.
the Academy
Yeah.
went gaga for A Beautiful Mind. They thought it was really, for
Yep.
lack of a better term, beautiful, I guess.
Absolutely. And again, A Beautiful Mind is a fine movie. And it's one of those that, like La La Land, if it just would have lost those categories, no one talks about it. I don't think anyone would care
probably.
as much. The only reason people have any sort of strong opinion about that movie is because it won these awards over films and performances, direction, whatever the case may be, that were simply stronger that year, which is what makes awards a unique animal. However, we'll get to that next week.
Yeah.
What we are doing for this particular episode is talking about the best performances of 2001.
Yeah.
Maybe Russell Crowe will come up. Maybe it won't.
He
We'll
will
get
not.
into that, but we will. We will be talking about the best performances of the year of 2001 specifically.
Yes.
Before we get to that, though, a couple of things here up front, Brendan. So you were talking about screenplay award season.
Yeah.
It was noted this last week that Barbie is opting for best original screenplay instead of adapted,
Yeah.
which is a little interesting because there has been precedent of movies of its ilk to go into adapted because it is adapting a brand, characters that do exist. It's doing it in a very original way, obviously, which is where the argument lies. And obviously they won that argument. Do you think that it should be original? Is that where it belongs, or should this be an adapted? What do you think?
That's a loaded question. That's a really loaded question.
Yeah.
I'll look at it from two sides, the practical side and then what my personal opinion is. So
Okay.
looking at the practicality of it, you're right that historically speaking, this does sort of change course from what we would normally see, right? It's pretty clear that this is Warner Brothers trying to plan a strategic move, right? It's them trying to plan a more likely scenario that the film Barbie will win a best screenplay Oscar in some capacity. And apparently they believe they have more of an opportunity to win that award if they campaign for original screenplay as opposed to adapted screenplay. And I get that. I do. Especially when you have other movies that are potentially going to be front runners for the best adapted screenplay category. I mean, the movie Barbie competed with Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer is going to be probably in that category for best adapted screenplay. It might not win, but there's potentially a more crowded race there, I think.
Yeah.
So I get it from that sense. But yeah, it does sort of raise questions about, is it going against the norm or even the rules or the logic of what we should be defining as an original screenplay as opposed to an adapted screenplay? Now, my personal opinion, as far as what I think, I kind of think it's the right call. I feel like the screenplay for Barbie is really more of an original screenplay than it is an adapted screenplay. And I guess it's just, I kind of like us as a movie-going audience to change our perspective on what that ultimately means, adapted versus original. Because if you were to lump a movie like Barbie into the best adapted screenplay category, I feel like what it inadvertently does is sort of undersell or undermine the real originality of that movie. And it's like the question, what defines originality when it comes to the writing of a movie these days? If it's simply based on an existing character, but the story that's being told is an original concoction around that existing medium, like, I don't want to diminish the originality of that, right?
Yeah.
And the charm of Barbie is, the ethos of Barbie is certainly the inspiration and the adaptability of it. But the story that's being told is very much from the mind of Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig. Like, that's like, it is an original creation as far as the adventure and the narrative and journey that those characters go through. So I prefer to see it in best original screenplay because I think it represents where the strengths of that movie is. So that's just me, but I get the frustration. I really do. I like, because it is sort of a marketing move by doing that.
Oh, it's wholly a marketing move. And I think what's interesting about this is that based off of precedent and how I feel like the Academy typically defines this, Barbie should fall under adapted. It is adapting something that is pre-existing. I think you could argue there's a level of objectivity to that.
That's fair. That's fair.
So this should be, based off of precedent and rules, it should be under adapted. However, I do agree with you when it comes to how the film is taking something that is pre-existing. It is reshaping it in a way that we simply have not seen before. Barbie, as depicted in the film, Ken, those characters, Barbie Land, there was nothing that existed in that way previously. Yeah. And there is such a ton of originality to it, from the direction to the performances, everything that you're talking about. I do agree that maybe you need to look at the intent or the spirit of what it is doing as an adaptation, because for those that listen to our Patreon sessions, patreon.com/InSessionFilm, go sign up. We talked a lot about Harry Potter over the last month or so. And specifically, we talked about the art of adaptation. Like, that is true adaptation. We're taking something that was pre-existing, we're putting it into movie form, and there is no debate that a lot of what is there on the screen comes from the books.
Yeah.
This is not the same thing.
It
might be taking something that is pre-existing, but obviously it is way more original. So I do think that perhaps we need to look at intent and at the spirit of the rule. And in this case, I do think there's very much an argument that it should fall under original. And honestly, if we're looking at it just at that, just the intent, the spirit of what Barbie is doing, it campaigning for original, I really have no problem with that. Now, all of that said, I do think more than anything else, this is a sports tactic.
That's it is. Yes, it really is. And it's unfortunate that, you know, the timing of what other movies are coming out that Barbie would potentially be competing in the best original screenplay category. That certainly plays a part in it, which is why I feel like the sports tactic aspect of it, we as an audience are going to forget about, instead having a conversation about what we're having right now. You know, like, what is the real definition going forward of original versus adapted? Like, should that change? Should we sort of change our criteria as time goes on?
I agree. And I think there should be a conversation around that. Yeah. If we're simply looking at it from a competitive perspective, would you rather compete with Poor Things, Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Zone of Interest, American Fiction, which we'll get to here in a second, All of Us Strangers? Would you rather compete with those movies or The Holdovers, Past Lives, Maestro, May December, Air, The Bike Riders, maybe Saltburn? Which one of those carries a little bit more weight? If you ask me,
it's probably the latter.
Category is way more competitive.
It's stacked.
Than the original.
It's stacked. Yeah, and that's not to say the original screenplay potentials are any less stacked. I mean, they're still pretty stacked in their own right, but there's a weight to what's going to be competed for best adapted screenplay. You're absolutely right there.
I agree. And look, I'm really looking forward to The Holdovers. It looks really fantastic by all accounts. It is really quite good. Past Lives is one of the best movies of the year.
Yes.
However, I also feel like those kind of movies, those small A24 gems that we love, it is usually an uphill climb unless you're a Noah Baumbach or a Greta Gerwig. Celine Song, this is her debut, and it's a foreign film. Can it really compete? Even though it should. Yeah. I'm not arguing quality, but in terms of campaigning and competition, does Celine Song really have a shot at topping Greta Gerwig or David Hemmingson for The Holdover? I don't know. Like, to me, as it stands, Maestro might surprise. May December, who knows? That could still be very good. But it feels like at this point, it's The Holdovers and Barbie.
It is. And it's because both of those films are made by people who are kind of in the club, at least a little bit more than Celine Song. When you're a newcomer like that, unless you make such a huge splash with whatever film you just started with. And to be fair, Past Lives really should be that kind of film because it is that good.
I agree.
But I don't think it will be. I think it might carry this perspective that what a great rising talent, she'll make an even better film sometime soon. And that's not to say I think that's true, but I think maybe Academy members might sort of have that unfair perspective on Celine Song.
I agree. Yeah. No, and I do hope that Celine Song is very much in the conversation. I hope that she is able to garner votes and that it becomes a three-headed race with Past Lives, The Holdovers, and Barbie. But even still, even if that's the case, that's still a little less crowded than having to fight against Poor Things, Oppenheimer, and Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
And I don't want to discount Ava DuVernay because I've heard nothing but spectacular things about Origin.
Yeah,
and that might surprise. That could very much be a player in all of this as well.
For sure.
The Zone of Interest, it's Jonathan Glazer. It's hard to really say, but in American Fiction, which we should probably also talk about because last week we talked about our favorite TIFF winners, our favorite People's Choice Award winners. And one of the things we talked about is that if you win the People's Choice Award, you're most likely getting nominated for Best Picture.
Yep.
So it was really interesting and exciting that Cord Jefferson's directorial debut. I think this is.
It
his
is. Yeah, I
feature
just checked.
directorial
It
debut,
is Cord's directorial debut.
starring the great Jeffrey Wright, won the People's Choice Award. Maybe a little bit of a surprise based off of some reaction that I saw, but
Yeah.
exciting nonetheless. What did you think about that one?
Well,
About
that
winner?
one, honestly, I was kind of surprised by that. And that's not to say I was not looking forward to the film or even had doubts about the film, but I felt like the conversation was so much stronger about a few other ones that it almost made it seem like this movie was like this little engine that could in some
Yeah.
ways. And I'm even more looking forward to it now. And I'm hearing a lot of great things, mostly around Jeffrey Wright's performance.
Yes.
And we've been clamoring for
Ugh.
more awards representation for this guy for a while. He
For a long
really
time, yeah.
should have been in heavier consideration for the French Dispatch. He really should
Big
have
time.
been.
Big
But
time.
it's great to see that is happening at least right now for him.
Absolutely. If nothing else, if this garners a nomination and maybe even a win for Jeffrey Wright, I'd be so excited.
Yeah.
The film itself sounds really great. I'm really looking forward to it. And it's interesting because we talked about how these first timers, they have to break into the club.
Yeah.
And here, like Celine's song, you have a first time writer and director, at least as far as the feature film goes, with Cord Jefferson. Can he break into the club on his first go round? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting.
Maybe.
I cannot wait to see the film, cannot wait to see how all of that unfolds. I do hope that he's able to break through, if not himself as a writer and director, that the film can maybe break through into Best Picture. And yes,
Well, I think just,
If
you know,
nothing
given
else, Jeffrey Rush.
given
Right.
Yeah. But given the history here, I think we can at least place bets and say American Fiction is going to be a Best Picture nominee now. Given what we talked about with the People's
Well, that's
Choice
what I was
Award.
saying. Like that, and that's where it's interesting because usually that is the case. We talked about that quite a bit last week, but you have a first timer here at the helm. Can he break into the club as a first timer?
Question. It's a good question.
I don't know. It wouldn't
Hope he
surprise
does.
me if the streak breaks here because he's a first timer. Maybe this does miss out on Best Picture. Again, whether that's deserved or not is a completely different conversation. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
It might very well be deserving and still miss. Who knows?
I kind of want to look at this now and sort of do like a part 2 to our conversation last week and look at the history of People's Choice winners at TIFF, and see if there were any first timers that also fell into that same category that still ended up garnering major awards consideration at the Oscars. And
yeah,
I mean, looking at these, most of these people were not first timers. At the very least, they may have been like second or third timers. You know, when you have someone like La La Land and Damien Chazelle, who was already becoming a bit of a household name after Whiplash. So that doesn't really count, even though it is one of his earlier films. He's still a very young filmmaker, but Room, Lenny Abrahamson, again, he's not a first timer, but that was sort of the first film I feel like people really started to take notice.
Yeah, he kind of broke out.
Yeah.
There.
So I guess, there's maybe a disparity there between first timers and first breakouts. And maybe some of these might fall more into the breakout category as opposed to first timers. Yeah, because most of these that I'm seeing here looking back at this list are pretty there's a lot of club attendees here. So yeah, you might be right. Maybe American Fiction will be the first time that the streak ends.
Well,
sadly.
and it's interesting. I wish that I would have had the foresight to see where this conversation would go because I didn't look this up earlier, but the last time it missed, which we noted last week, was Where Do We Go Now in 2011 with Nadine Labaki.
Yeah.
Was that her first film? One of her first films? I don't know.
I'm looking that up. Yeah, as a director, that is her second film.
Second film.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I see that here. So her second film breaks through. And I think she's only directed a handful anyway.
Only 4. Her last
Only
film was
4 films.
Capernaum in 2018, I think it was.
Okay, yes, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that's pretty close, and that did miss. And for all intents and purposes, because that was her second film, it's a name that people don't really recognize. It's not a Steve McQueen, it's not a Martin McDonagh, it's not a Steven Spielberg. You know, it did miss. Now,
You tell me Steven Spielberg wasn't a first timer?
You know, Chloe Zhao had only directed a few films, and she got in. And that film was obviously nominated for Best Picture and then won. So that seemed to maybe buck the trend a little bit.
Yeah, she was kind of like at that breakout stage, but was maybe slowly overcoming that after the success of The Rider and how great that film was. So maybe, I guess that kind of fits in both categories simultaneously in its own weird way. But yeah, you're right.
But, you know, when I look at these winners based off of the conversation we had last week, I feel like Cord Jefferson, and again, I haven't seen the film, but could it fall? I guess I'll just phrase it as a question. Could it fall in line with Nadine Labaki in the sense that he's a name that we don't know? You know, or you look at Bella from 2006, Alejandro Monteverdi. That also misses. We talked about Nikki Caro for The Whale Rider. That also missed. So, like, it wouldn't, I guess, shock me if he fell in line with those other filmmakers in the sense that the collective voting body, they don't know him as much. Should that matter?
Yeah.
Well, that's a conversation maybe for another time. You know?
I mean, the short answer is it shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't
based
matter.
on quality,
I
and that's
agree.
it. Yeah. But,
I agree.
But sadly, it does matter. That's the thing.
I agree. If American Fiction is good enough, it should be in.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, it is very good. So we'll see. I certainly hope it follows the Chloe Zhao trajectory.
Yeah. My bet is I think it will, just given the history, but I don't know. Sometimes trends get debunked. It sometimes happens.
You never know. And it's also interesting to take note as well. The runner-ups were Alexander Payne for The Holdovers and everyone's beloved Hayao Miyazaki.
Gosh, I can't wait for that movie. And I hear it's weird. I hear it makes Spirited Away look like it's just one easy film to watch. And we talked about that. Spirited Away I'm surprised that is considered the more like accessible and favorited Ghibli film because that movie is weird. That is
very bizarre. I agree.
Movie.
Very, very weird movie. I do agree. All right, before we get to 2001, we don't have to spend a lot of time here, but because we did talk about it so much during the summer, I think it's worth noting that Oppenheimer officially became the highest grossing biopic of all time.
Indeed.
We have crossed $900 million, Brendan.
Where's that billion? Where's
Insane.
that billion?
We're inching so close to $1 billion. And look, we have a few months left. I presume that this is going to stay in theaters through the
Universal,
end of the year.
they know what they have. They're going to do whatever they can to get to that $1 billion mark. It's
one big push at the end of the year. Let's get this to $1 billion. Could you imagine?
I am so glad it overtook Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh my gosh, yes. I completely agree.
I mean, money, box office
is in both of them.
We say it doesn't matter. We say those things don't matter, but when it comes to movies like Bohemian Rhapsody and then Oppenheimer, yes, it matters. It absolutely matters.
I agree. So it's the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time, the highest grossing biopic of all time. And I just want it to get to $1 billion because there's something significant about the number, obviously. But for a 3-hour movie, a talking movie, primarily, to make $1 billion, just my mind can't comprehend. I can't wrap my head around it. That is incredible.
It's incredible.
Just incredible.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbie. But again, I think
Barbenheimer.
But I think the whole Barbenheimer idea is, I mean, that certainly helped. We talked about that for months, right? But at this point, months really being like 2 months because the whole Barbenheimer thing came out in July 21st. So, but I feel like at this point now, what's really carrying Oppenheimer is just the word of mouth that it's a great movie. Like that's really helping it now, and it's really helping to sustain it.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting stuff. Do love to see it. All right, we are here to talk about coffee. One of our favorites.
Oh man, I need some coffee.
Yeah, Brendan definitely needs it, as
Yeah.
do I. But that's why we love Coffee Cult,
Indeed.
who sources specialty grade gourmet coffee. It is all about the highest quality coffee you can get. Other companies will do things to degrade the bean, cheapen the bean, because they want to get it in the stores cheaply, $2 a can.
Yeah,
And you know what? It tastes like garbage.
it does. Or you get it
It's
from
not
your
good.
local whatever coffee shop it is, and you realize you're really just buying caffeinated milk and sugar, right?
Exactly. Well, and that is the thing. Some coffee companies out there, we won't name names,
Right.
but they purposefully will give you bad coffee because they know you'll want that milk. You'll want that sugar. You know,
Ugh.
that stuff is horrible for you. Absolutely horrible.
It's just gross. It's gross.
Yeah,
I-
it's
I-
not
if I want
good.
if I want coffee, I want coffee. That's what I want.
Exactly. This is all about high grade, quality, pure coffee. That's
Yes.
what they're all about. And the coffees are so good that you'll get those robust flavors, chocolatey flavors, sweet flavors, whatever your palate salivates for. One of my favorites is the Colombian IPE, which is this really great coffee that has these really potent notes of peach and blueberry and strawberry. Like I've talked about it on the show. I've told Brennan it's like having strawberry shortcake
Oh my
in a
gosh.
mug,
Oh,
blueberry muffin.
sounds
That's
like
what it tastes
authentic
like.
dessert right there. Authentic
so
and
good.
like
And-
genuine dessert. Like what? That's what I want.
Yes.
That's what I crave.
And these are natural flavors. Natural flavors. And that is important because there are, you have to be careful when a coffee company is like, hey, we have pumpkin flavored coffee or we have hazelnut flavored coffee. They're
Yeah.
talking about chemicals. They're
Yep.
using a chemical process to bring those flavors out. And shocking, not good for you either.
Isn't it great to know that when you have a coffee and it has those aromas or those flavors of those things that they're actually part of the ingredients? Like that's
Yes.
Doesn't that just make it seem more right? if,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term.
Exactly. You want it to be natural and organic. That's what
Yeah.
these flavors are, and it's just the highest quality you can
Yeah.
get. They also source from farms that pay their workers equally and fairly. That's a big thing
Yep.
for them as well, especially the women
Yep.
on those farms. They roast to order, so it's not just stale coffee sitting around. They wait for your order to come in. The system boots out, hey, there's this order. Roasting is done. You get that bag in just a few days.
Absolutely.
So it is extremely fresh, guaranteed. Right now, for the holidays, pretty soon they're going to be launching what they are calling the Coffee Cult Loot Box, which will come with a mug and a coffee because it's a loot. For any of the video gamers out there, you'll know. When you get a loot in a video game, you don't know what's in there. There's all kinds of goodies, all
Yeah.
kinds of fun goodies.
Yeah.
You don't know. So you order a loot box for you, or it's a perfect gift for you or a friend or family member. And maybe they'll get the dark roast. Maybe they'll get the holiday blend. Who
Yeah.
knows? Medium roast, all kinds of fun stuff in there. But you'll get a bag of coffee and a mug in each box. So for the holidays, something to keep in mind. It's going to be really great. Go to coffeecult.com and you'll see all the information there. Use our code at checkout for 15% off. So that's 15% off with our code ISF. Again, that code is ISF, and you'll get 15% off at checkout. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Oh my gosh, Brendan, we have t-shirts.
Yeah, I
All
love that
kinds
shirt.
of stuff
I love that shirt.
available.
And I love some of the new stuff we're getting too. Some of those new
we-
designs, man. Some of those new
Man.
designs.
The In Session Film Store is one of my favorite things that we offer. It's been
Yeah.
fun to come up with the different designs and everything that we have available. And as we noted on social media this last week, and I believe we mentioned this on the show at the end of the show last week,
We did. Yes.
but we have a new In Session Film t-shirt inspired by the wonderful Midnight Special,
Yep.
one of my favorite movies. And we have a Midnight Special t-shirt that you can go and check out right now on TeePublic, teepublic.com/store/InSessionFilm.
And it
That's
is
where
a
you can
great
find us.
design courtesy of JD Duran over here. Really great
Appreciate
stuff.
that.
And
Really
it's
do appreciate that.
such an important one for us to choose because for a while we've also had, and we still have, the hashtag JD Tears.
We do. The
shirt.
hashtag JD Tears is up there.
I
We have
feel like-
the Star Wars
Yep.
inspired.
We have the Barbie inspired In Session film logo
Yes.
as well. But to go back to Midnight Special, I feel like that's the movie that sort of helped coin the term hashtag JD Tears. So we needed to represent it in some way.
Yeah. Yes. So it's up there right now. I'll always worry about you. That's the deal. That t-shirt is available. I own one. I love it. I've been wearing it around a lot. And I will be purchasing more. I got to get it in all kinds of colors. And
I need to get
varieties.
mine as well. That would be great on stage when my band is rocking out
Yes,
wearing something like that. I'd be like, what
absolutely.
is that shirt? That's a cool shirt. I get that reference.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun putting that one together. So I hope people
can tell.
enjoy it. I'll always worry about you. That's the deal. Again, that's teepublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. We'll get that information up at InSessionFilm.com/store as well.
Yep.
Either way, be sure to go and check all of that out. But supporting us by getting In Session Film gear, it really helps us out a ton.
Absolutely.
And we do appreciate it. And again, you can see all the details at InSessionFilm.com/store. All right, let's move on to 2001. As I noted up at the top, next week we will get into our retrospective. We'll talk about our favorite films of the year, break down our top 10. For this episode, we are talking about the best performances of the year. Now, I am curious, Brendan, how you prepared for this episode because Brendan and I did not talk about this specifically. We knew we were coming into the episode talking about our favorite performances of the year, but we did not have any sort of specificity as far as format goes.
No.
And I think that's going to make this a lot of fun because I'll tell you what I did and why I think this conversation will be interesting.
Okay.
Especially not knowing how you did it. So at the In Session Film Awards, as you may or may not know, we do talk about Best Actor and Best Actress and Supporting Actor. We have those conventional categories as well as some unique ones that we have to ourselves.
Yeah.
So I actually went ahead and did my 5 nominees for all 4 acting categories. As it is now, this could change by next week because there are some films I still need to revisit or that I need to watch before we get to the retrospective. However, as it stands now, I did lay out my 5 nominees, but
for each of the 4 acting
for each
categories,
of the 4
right?
acting categories with some honorable mentions, but I'm also leaving this a little open-minded based on how this conversation goes. I do think depending on where we swing the pendulum here, I may flip out some of these nominees here. That's how I approach this. I wanted to have my nominees for all of the categories, but I'm going to leave it open-ended. Depending on where this goes, I may swap some out.
Yeah, I did not do that, and it's only because I didn't have the time to do it in that detail of a way. For context, I was away in Indiana this whole past weekend. I was a groomsman in a wedding, so I had a lot of work to do, but I did just very simply compile a list alphabetically of my favorite performances of the year.
There we go.
That's really all I did, and it crosses boundary categories. So or I should say category boundaries is probably the better way to put it. So it's a mix of leading actor, actress, supporting actor, supporting actress. I didn't really differentiate, but since that you are doing that, I may sort of reshuffle them in a certain way to try to categorize them as this conversation goes. And honestly, the more we talk throughout this, I may even think to myself, oh yeah, wait, that performance in that movie, that's one I would nominate. So there is going to be a level of spontaneity here that I think will make this a lot of fun.
I agree. Brendan will be formulating his list as we go. Mine might be changing and swapping out. Who knows?
I may even mention a name where you think, you know what, that should be in one
exactly.
of these categories. Yeah,
you know, because I admittedly did struggle with a few of these categories, and maybe I overlooked something that is certainly part of it as well. But that's why I wanted to be a little open with this. None of it is written in concrete as it is right now.
In fact, I'm actually, as you're talking, I'm starting to pull up my trusted Microsoft Word doc and start to pull together some category shuffling here, so I at least have something in my back pocket if it were to come to that.
All right. Well, as we get started here, I think what we'll do, I will list out my nominees for Best Actor, and then we can kind of converse from there.
All right, so we want to do each category and then kind of...
Yeah, we can go through each category.
Let's do
and
that,
see where you kind of fall in those categories.
Okay.
I do want to throw out a little bit of a caveat here as well, some context for those that might be new to our retrospectives, because some of these films, because of release structure, it's hard to decipher what year they fall in.
Right.
And we typically go by its limited release date.
Yep.
So a film might be labeled 2000 on IMDb, but you look at its limited release date and it was in 2001. And that's when it actually had its awards run.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that out there because I've seen films like In the Mood for Love come in through a couple of different years. That is a 2001 movie by our criteria.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you hear a film that we mentioned that you don't think is 2001 or vice versa. That's where we're coming from in terms of our approach here.
Yeah, that's right.
So you In the Mood for Love will be represented on the show. Just throwing that out there.
Absolutely. It's one of the year's best. We don't have to say that.
Yeah.
Because if you're an active listener of the In Session Film Podcast, you'll JD
know.
and I think that's a perfect movie.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece. All right, so here are my 5 nominees for Best Actor as it stands. We'll see if this changes as we go.
Okay.
Denzel Washington for Training Day.
Okay.
Gene Hackman for The Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay.
John Cameron Mitchell for Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Okay.
Haley Joel Osment for AI, Artificial Intelligence. And Tony Leung for In the Mood for Love.
Okay.
Those are my 5 for actor.
Well, I in my list of my favorite performances of the year, this is actually one of those years that I think the leading actor category was probably the strongest of all of these. And there are a lot of great ones we'll talk about in these other categories, but the first names that came to my mind were mostly ones that would fit into Best Leading Actor. And most of the ones you listed there are ones I had on my list as well, including Gene Hackman, John Cameron Mitchell, Haley Joel Osment. Some of the other ones I had here were Billy Bob Thornton for The Man Who Wasn't There.
God, so good.
Yeah.
That is a great performance.
Tom Wilkinson for In the Bedroom is another one, also nominated for that movie as well for the Oscar. So I guess like those two alongside Haley Joel Osment, John Cameron Mitchell, and Gene Hackman would probably be my top 5. But actually, I don't know. Tony Leung, man, because spoiler alert, I have Maggie Chung in my list for Best Actress, and you can't really nominate one over the other.
I think they're both so vital to that movie.
It's such a melding of a performance. I mean, that's the point.
And that's why I could not leave it out or separate it. And Best Actor for me was by far the hardest of them.
Yeah.
Because, yes, there's Billy Bob Thornton deserves to be in here. Another one, Guy Pearce for Memento. That's arguably his best movie.
What I love about
performance.
What I love about his performance in Memento, and this is something we sort of talked about in passing about the movie Memento, is that it's actually kind of a funny movie at times. Like there is kind of a sarcastic nature to Guy Pearce's character in that movie, Leonard, and that I think is pretty piercingly funny at times, and he makes that work really well.
Another performance along those same lines, and I mentioned this, I believe, on a Patreon episode not that long ago. I want to say that's where we talked about this. But I thought of Tom Cruise. And maybe it's because
Okay.
Tom Cruise in the last decade has been the Mission Impossible Top Gun guy.
He
That's
has been.
where
Yeah.
we've primarily seen him. And then you go back and you revisit something like Vanilla Sky. And I don't think the film is great. I think it's good. It's not great. But he is excellent in that role. He's very, very good. And it makes me salivate for more Tom Cruise performances like that. I want to see him outside of Ethan Hunt and Maverick. I want to see him really chew on a role like this again because he is fantastic as an actor.
Yeah.
Say what you will about him as a human being. That's a completely different conversation. But as an actor, as an artist, he's really great. And we have seen that in bits with Top Gun Maverick. I actually think he gave a genuinely phenomenal performance in that movie. But to move away from the blockbusters and to really dig into a role like this again, Vanilla Sky, or at least his performance, certainly had me salivating for more. And similarly to what you were talking about there with Guy Pearce, yes, there's a level of pathos to it given the tragedy his character experiences.
Right.
But it's also quite funny in places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he tiptoes that line impeccably. So he doesn't crack my 5, but similarly to Guy Pearce, I think it's a really great performance that's at least worthy of being in the conversation.
It's an underappreciated performance, and this was a time when Tom Cruise was taking some risks as an actor because this is 2001, and only 2 years before this, he was nominated for an Oscar for Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. So this was sort of that period where he was, kind of getting a little bit weirder. Right.
Yeah.
And even his work with Steven Spielberg, which are blockbuster films like Minority Report or War of the Worlds, there are nuances to those performances
He's
he gives
great
in those.
those.
There's a complexity to those movies that I think sometimes gets forgotten underneath the veneer of those being big blockbuster films, but there are complexities there for sure that he brings.
I agree. Another performance that I'll mention here as an honorable mention, I mean, again, say what you will about him now, post what happened not that long ago, but Will Smith is terrific in Ali.
Yeah.
One of his best.
I don't love the movie.
He really transformed. Similarly, I think the film has its issues, but the performance, I think, is pretty impeccable. And he really brings that energy. Like, he transforms and is fantastic.
That's kind of a reoccurring theme with most of the movies or performances, rather, that we'll be talking about on this episode, at least for me, is that many of my favorite performances from this year are from movies that are probably not going to crack my top 10. At least not all of them, but a good chunk of them are. Like looking at Best Actor once again, I love John Cameron Mitchell's performance in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I don't love the movie fully, but I love the performance. And I feel the same way about Billy Bob Thornton in The Man Who Wasn't There, which is probably like lesser Coen Brothers for me. It's still a movie I really like. It's sitting in that like 3.5 out of 5 star rating on Letterboxd for me, which I think is on that verge of at least being very good. But what makes these movies so good are these amazing and sometimes bold and daring performances.
I agree.
And they're great.
No, yeah. And it certainly sounds like I'm higher on both of those films.
I think you are.
I really like The Man Who Wasn't There. It's not in my top 5 for the Coen brothers, but I still think it's one of the better films of 2001.
Okay.
Certainly speaks to the prowess of them as filmmakers. But Billy Bob Thornton is great. Hedwig, I also adore. I think that film is.
I think I saw your rating of that.
wonderful.
You like that a little bit more than me, but I have so much respect for that movie. I don't think it fully works in totality, but I like the pieces of it a lot.
Yeah, I love what it's aiming for, and I love the music. The music is rocking.
I have to say, I didn't love the music, and
engrossing.
maybe that was part of it. I was a little hit or miss on the music, but it's
I
all a matter of
fully
taste.
engrossed
Really.
by it.
That's fair.
And John Cameron Mitchell just completely owns that film.
I love that performance. It is one of the
so
best
good.
performances of this year.
Yeah. So he cracks my 5. And Guy Pearce was the one I really struggled with the most, though. With only 5 slots, I just wanted to somehow invent a 6th.
Well, I mean, we're doing this loosely. We can do whatever the heck we want, right?
It is. I mean, all of this is however we want to do it. So we could cheat if we wanted. But if I'm going by the rules, if I'm playing the game the same everyone else is,
Yeah.
then one has to be out, and that's the one that hurts the most.
Yeah.
But when looking at Denzel, Gene Hackman, those two performances are probably the two for me.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. Haley Joel Osment is just, and I don't know. Never mind. All five of these are great. I can't decide.
Well, what I was going to ask, yeah, like, do you have a winner?
I don't.
I do.
Well, yes, I think I do have a winner. However, all of these are fantastic, and it is hard. But at the end of the day, if we were doing a true In Session Film Awards for 2001,
I want to see if it's the same one I'm thinking.
Gene Hackman would get my victory here.
I think Gene
Hackman
gives the best performance in 2001. I'm just throwing this out there. I think the best performance of the entire year is Gene Hackman for the Royal.
Totally with you. Yes, Gene Hackman, just stellar all-time performance. And one of my favorite films ever made.
Yeah. I think my second favorite performance of the entire I think my second favorite performance of this entire year might be Haley Joel Osment from AI. Similarly, both in the same category. That's where it got hard for me.
And honestly, that's why as soon as I mentioned Denzel and Gene might be my top two, I say that and then immediately regretted it because I'm like, man, Haley Joel Osment though is so good at AI. And because Denzel gives one of the best loud performances I've seen.
So
and he is fantastic, worthy of being among this crop of nominees here. However, I do think there's an argument to be made that Haley Joel Osment gives a much more challenging performance. Not only is he having to play an artificial robot of sorts, but the depths of the emotional spectrum he has to portray while still evoking the naivete of him being a robot is incredible.
The way he bridges that line between the humanity and the artificiality is like I don't even think people were picking up on what he was actually doing until years later. We talk about films being reevaluated as time has gone on, and AI is a big one from this year.
Yeah,
I mean, I've mentioned this many times. It's in my top 3 favorite movies of all time. So if you don't know what my number 1 movie of the year is going to be, I don't know what to tell you. So I'll just simply say that.
Absolutely. No, I'm completely with you. That performance, that film is really spectacular. But that's not to take away from anything Tony Leung does as well, because an absolutely incredible, subtle performance in that film that I adore immensely. So a great year for Best Actor.
I agree.
Just put it that way.
Yeah.
Should we move on to actress?
Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. I've got quite a few of them here as well.
Now, this is one that I found a little bit challenging as well. I don't quite have the depth of Best Actor, but I still think this is a pretty great category. And one where, again, I'm contemplating wrestling with a 6th nominee here.
Okay.
All right. Here's where I'm at. Sissy Spacek for In the Bedroom.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Nicole Kidman for Moulin Rouge and The Others. I couldn't pick.
I'll pick for you. It's Moulin Rouge.
I love them both, though. Pretty equally. Naomi Watts and Mulholland Drive.
Okay.
Audrey Tautou and Amelie.
Yep.
And, of course, Maggie Cheung in The Mood for Love. So that, lends a question as to Halle Berry. She
would not crack my top 20.
Okay, because that is a film, admittedly, that I have not revisited yet for this. And I honestly
she's pretty good in it.
I don't know if I will, because the film itself, and maybe this is unfair, but I have never been in love with that movie. I don't think that it would crack my top 20, even if I was to revisit it, and I wanted to prioritize the movies that I thought would have a fighting chance to be in my top 20, if not even my top 10 or my top 5.
Yeah.
So Monsters Ball was never a priority, and I haven't seen the movie in a long time. I did love her performance, but that's why I have her here as a question mark, because I don't know if in retrospect it would crack my 5, but I don't know. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Yeah, it's not a bad performance. I feel like, and this is very unfair. We're using that word a lot, and I think it's okay for us to admit that we might be in the wrong here, but cynically speaking, I feel like her performance, accepting the award and her speech was more interesting than the performance itself. Because just remember how like notorious that was, the way that she was like crying and reaching for everyone as she was speaking and giving her acceptance speech. And not to say it wasn't genuine, but there was like a certain iconography about that I found more memorable than anything she did in the movie Monsters Ball. Which again, not to knock the performance, I just think there were better leading actress performances from that year, mostly those that you already mentioned.
I agree. I agree. Those 5 very much. Like those are my 5. I wrote Halle Berry as a 6 as a question mark, just as a talking point, because if I was to revisit the film, and I just might not be able to until after the fact, but if I was to revisit it, maybe she is worthy of being in that conversation. I don't know. As it stands right now, it's more of a question mark. And she's on the outside looking in.
I do think that's fair, and many of the ones you brought up there would be among my nominees as well. We have quite a few crossover here. I also have Maggie Cheung from In the Mood for Love. I have Audrey Tautou for Amelie. I would probably also have Sissy Spacek for In the Bedroom. That might be my 5th place one. It could swap out with something else as we talk about this further. But the other 2 I have here, Thora Birch for Ghost World.
Well, see, and that was going to be the next one I brought up, because if I'm being honest at this point, again, without revisiting Monsters Ball, my actual 6th is Thora Birch.
Yeah, she's in my 5 here. I think she's
great.
wonderful in that movie. And my last nominee, I have Reese Witherspoon for Legally Blonde. It is an amazing comedic performance. And I feel like we don't give those types of performances enough credit or weight when we do some of these. I know we sometimes do, and usually when one of them gets an Oscar nomination, like let's say Melissa McCarthy for Bridesmaids, I think it's the wrong one. But I really love what Reese is doing in this movie. I think it is genuinely great.
Okay. I would not have her in my top 6 or 7, but it's a performance I do like. I do have a comedic performance, though, in one of my supporting categories. We'll get to that.
I do too. That'd be funny if we're thinking of the same one.
I don't think we are, though. I don't think we're thinking of the same one. I'd be surprised if we did, but
we'll see.
Who knows? I do agree with you, broadly speaking, that comedic performances, animated performances, motion capture performances, generally speaking, those should be considered way more. Horror films, performances from horror films should be considered more.
Yeah. They have a history of being ignored, sadly.
Absolutely. And on this show, we've absolutely considered them quite a bit. Andy Serkis has been nominated several times.
That's why the In Session Film Award should be replacing the Oscars, man. They should be replacing the Oscars.
We've had some vocal performances be nominated. Yeah, I'm with you. Totally with you in that regard. But yeah, Legally Blonde, Reese Witherspoon, good performance. Not quite up there for me. The other one, and I guess this is more of a supporting performance, but I guess you could argue lead maybe if we wanted to do the whole Barbie category fraud thing, although that's not really category fraud, but still falls under that umbrella.
Yeah, sure.
Penelope Cruz for Vanilla Sky.
Yeah, that again, I haven't seen them. I need to revisit the movie to have more of a fresh take on this, but from what I recall, I feel like that would fall more in supporting.
That might be more supporting. Yeah. I could see the argument going both ways, which is why I bring it up.
I would say if you're trying to argue between Penelope Cruz versus Cameron Diaz and who is more of a lead, if any one of them is, it would definitely be more. It's definitely more Cruz than Cameron Diaz. Yeah,
exactly.
For sure.
Especially given that context.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's why I simply bring it up as a question. But that's where I stand. Those are my 5 for Best Actress.
Yep.
Solid 5.
I think it's a very solid 5. Do you know who would win for you? Do you have a clear winner, or is this another one of those flip a 5-sided coin?
It is a little bit. It's a tight race, like it is for Best Actor, but I think I go Maggie Cheung here for In the Mood for Love. I think that's where I go.
Well, I'll make it a little bit different and go with Audrey Tautou for Amelie. And this is from someone who might not even have Amelie in his top 10. Like I love the movie mostly, There are a few things about it I don't love. So I know you like the movie overall more than I do, but I love her performance.
She's
I
great.
really do.
She's great. Probably my number 2 here if I was doing a ranking of the 5.
Okay.
But yeah, both of those are really quite great. I will absolutely go to bat though for Nicole Kidman for both of them. For both of them.
Yeah,
I
that's fair.
truly cannot choose. She's fantastic in Moulin Rouge. And the others is wildly different. I just love that the two performances could not really be any different.
Sure.
The films especially. But she's terrific in both. Absolutely terrific. Love both of those movies. And Sissy Spacek is, pretty concretely in my 5. It sounds like she's a little bit more loose for you. I think she gives the best performance in that movie. It's not even close for me.
Oh, it's no.
And
not for me.
I love the cast on the whole. There might be another one represented here in a moment. But
I think with that we might be thinking of the same one. And if we are thinking of the same one, that's who I think gives the best performance in the movie.
Which is fair.
Yeah.
I will say this. I think you can flip a coin. I think they're equally fantastic.
Yeah. Now we're just making a sports competition out of something that shouldn't exist.
That's so dumb.
How much we commonly say we don't like that. Here we are doing the same thing. We're so contradictory.
I know. Absolutely. That is to say, the performances in that film are really quite great.
Yep.
And Spacek easily makes this list for me. All right, so that's where I'm at. Should we move on to a supporting actor?
Yeah, let's do this. I'm genuinely curious who you have in the supporting categories here, because most of the ones that I had on my list kind of fell in the leading category because they were the easiest ones to churn up. But I mean, I do have some here for my back pocket that I'll swing by here.
Okay. I will say this real fast. One of these, it is straight up category fraud. It is.
Oh, you're doing one of these, aren't you? Okay.
Now, I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. One is selfish, and that's because, as we noted, Best Actor is extremely crowded. It is very crowded.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Where are you going with this?
Well, hold on. So that is part of it. The other element of it is that this actor was campaigned as supporting. So there's already
so then it's
precedent.
not your category fraud. Then.
It's not my category fraud.
Okay, that makes it a little bit better.
Okay. So I just wanted to lay that out there, that while I do think it is, it's not mine. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just following direction.
You're just riding the wave that the
Just
Academy
riding the
said.
wave.
Okay, yeah, okay.
All right. So here are my 5. Ian McKellen, Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Ben Stiller, The Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay.
Luke Wilson, The Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay.
Ethan Hawke, Training Day, is a leading performance. I don't care how they label it. He is as much of a lead in that film as Denzel. I'm sorry. It is his movie.
Mm-hmm.
Denzel is campaigned for leading, and understandably so. He is in the film a lot, so I put him in lead as well. Ethan Hawke was campaigned under supporting.
He was.
I
You're
followed suit. But
You're right.
he is a leading performance in that movie. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
But it's crowded, and I think he's equally great. So sure, I'll accept the cheating here. And then my last one, which now that I think about it, could follow suit really, because he's such a prominent character in this film, but it's really not his film. He is a supporting player. Eddie Murphy for Shrek is my 5th nominee here.
Oh,
Yep.
there's many things about Shrek that I don't like, and that's one of them's Eddie Murphy's vocal performance.
I
don't like it. There's a
it's-
lot about Shrek I don't like. There admittedly is. It's just I never cared for it.
I don't disagree that, and you and I are going to face heat for this. So let's just prepare for that now, because this film is beloved. And I have seen this quite prominently when you and I start talking about How to Train Your Dragon with the conviction that we do, because you always get the pushback of, but what about the Shrek films?
Yeah.
And here I am to say that they're okay. They're fine.
Yeah. Shrek 2 is my favorite of them.
How to Train Your Dragon, that series is mountains better than the Shrek movies, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry
I agree.
if you disagree. And I don't really love any of the Shrek films, but I do think that Eddie Murphy gives a great performance. It's not his best vocal performance in an animated movie. That is Mulan.
I agree.
But I do think he gives a pretty excellent performance. And it comes in an animated film with a comedic sensibility. It's different than a lot of the others that I could throw on here. And maybe you could swap it out with Steve Buscemi from Ghost World, perhaps.
Well, he's at my list. Steve Buscemi from Ghost World is one of my 5.
Or a William Hurt from AI. Sure, you could swap that out. I talked about how at the beginning of this, I am open to the possibility of swapping these out. Or any of the Ocean's 11 cast. I don't think there is a lead in that movie. It's all supporting.
That's maybe aside from George Clooney, but that's why I couldn't pick anyone from Ocean's 11 because I who do you separate out? Maybe Brad Pitt, but just because he has more to do, but that's not really a testament to how great the performance is.
I really struggle to separate any of them. It is the collective ensemble that makes that movie what it is.
Oh yeah, that's the SAG winner right there.
Yes, 100%.
Every one of these years has at least 1 or 2 movies where you look at it as, oh, that's the ensemble movie, right? And I feel like from this year, what is it? It's Ocean's 11 and the Royal Tenenbaums, right? I feel like those are the 2 most people would go to as like the ensemble performance movie.
Yeah, I agree. It's phenomenal. So I had a hard time separating them.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Eddie Murphy, though, and I love William Hurt, maybe you'll talk me into it, or Buscemi, maybe you'll talk me into it. But as it stands, I won't lose sleep at night over these 5.
I will say at this point now in my 5, I actually don't have William Hurt, and it's primarily because if I included William Hurt, my heart kept telling me, well, should I also include Jude Law from AI? But I don't want to have. I want to at least get some diversity here and offer some out of the box picks to showcase how great some of these other performances were in these other movies that might not get heavily talked about. So for the sake of variety, I left them off, which means I did have Steve Buscemi from Ghost World among my nominees. I also have Ben Kingsley from Sexy Beast.
Yeah, I thought about that one a lot too. I really like that performance a lot. I just think about it in the context of Denzel, because they're both loud performances, and Denzel for me he just gives a much better performance for me. I love Ben Kingsley in that movie. I think he's extremely effective for what that film is calling for. But when it comes to the context of this conversation, it's a little bit one note for me.
Well, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think I'm just a real sucker for performances like this that just so effortlessly balance like fear and comedy, which I think he does.
Sure.
There are with his performance in Sexy Beast, I would sometimes go from feeling scared out of my mind watching him to just utterly laughing out loud in a span of like 1 second. To balance that out, it takes a lot of skill.
Sure.
And I at least wanted to recognize that because I do think he is very good. As far as a few other nominees that I have here right now, I also have Ben Stiller from the Royal Tenenbaums. He does give my favorite supporting performance in the movie. A few oddball ones. And I don't know if these would end up in my true top 5, but I'm just being a little bit weird with this because I think these are supporting performances that really stand out in movies that have such an ensemble cast. But I love Robbie Coltrane in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone as Hagrid. I love that performance.
Okay. We've opened up a can of worms now. Okay. We have finally gotten to a performance where I've really started to rethink something. We've finally gotten to that point.
We got it. We got it.
Okay. Now you're pushing buttons here. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, then the last one I have here, and I'll be honest, this is probably the one I give this award to. Christopher Maloney from Wet Hot American Summer.
Yeah. He's great. I love him and Paul Rudd. Those are my two. Those are my two from that movie.
But yeah, I think those would be my 5 that I just laid out there.
Yeah, Maloney is one I would consider as well. Really great. And when it comes to comedic performances, it's so different than something like Eddie Murphy and Shrek. Honestly, like I could swap that out. I could swap out Coltrane as well with Eddie Murphy and not lose sleep, but I'm not losing sleep with Eddie Murphy in my 5 either. I think he is that good in Shrek, even if it's not his best vocal performance. And Shrek isn't that good of a movie. Come at me, I guess.
It's okay. It's fine.
I apologize.
It's
I'm not
fine.
trying to hurt anyone.
It was a time capsule movie. I think it was way better at the time than it is now.
I agree. But I do think that as far as animated comedic performances go, I think Eddie Murphy was great as he was at that time. And I do think, Donkey is one of those iconic animated characters, for better or worse. But I'm not losing sleep. But I will say, yeah, I mean, I could swap them out with any of those 3 that we mentioned, and I think that'd be fine too. So I might have to marinate on that for about a week.
Okay.
And
so you'll have a new answer in a week from now when we actually do our top 5.
The top 4 are not moving.
Okay.
Ben Stiller, Luke Wilson, Ethan Hawke, Ian McKellen, they're not going anywhere. Those are in concrete, in stone. They are already chiseled. Actually, Eddie Murphy's the only one here.
Now that I think about it further, I almost feel like I could pick even more people from the Royal Tenenbaums. Like I love Danny Glover in that movie as well. Yeah. I really do. I think he's really
very good.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's another ensemble cast. If it's not Ocean's 11, it's absolutely the Royal Tenenbaums.
Oh, I do think that's the best ensemble movie of the year. And it's just because
Fellowship
of how...
is great though too. That's in the conversation.
Yeah, but I don't know. There's something about what Wes Anderson is doing with Royal Tenenbaums that I think just speaks to the ethos of an ensemble movie.
I agree. Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. So yeah, those 4 are not moving. But in a week's time, could I leave out Eddie Murphy for a Buscemi? Yeah, I mean, that very well could happen. So. Anything else as far as supporting actor goes?
I don't know. I don't think so. I can't think of anything offhand that I would also consider for this one. And maybe I'm just forgetting something that I think should be in here.
I will say this, if I can interrupt for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, when we're talking about the best performances of the year, I don't know if this qualifies. I don't think that it does. However, since we're just talking off the cuff here, I will say, though, a really fun surprise from 2001 that I guess would qualify as supporting performances because they're in the movie for 10 minutes, maybe. Our lovely friends, Jesse and Celine.
Oh, in Waking Life?
Yeah. In Waking Life, they reprise themselves. And I did not remember that. I did not remember that at all. So as far as my mouth falling on the floor when they came up, that was really fun to experience again.
If we're seriously dissecting that, I think it's just more the moment itself and not the performances.
For sure. Which is why I lay out. I don't know if it qualifies for awards necessarily.
We have an award for best surprise moment or best surprise movie, right? That would be this version of 2001 for us.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So throwing that out there as a fun supporting moment from 2001.
Okay.
I guess that goes for both actor and actress, obviously. But
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's it. I have, on my list.
Can't think of anyone else. Actually, you know what? There's let me see if I can find the name. I'm blanking on the individual's name. I think it's Eduardo Noriega from The Devil's Backbone.
Oh, okay.
Is one that's one I might not quite top 5, but I at least want to acknowledge that because that is a film I quite adore, and I at least wanted to recognize it somewhere in here because I do think the performances in that movie are also strong.
Do you have a thought on Jim Broadbent for Iris, who actually won the award.
It's admittedly still a blind spot for me.
Same. That's on my
Yeah.
list. I'm gonna maybe get to that this week if I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. So I couldn't speak to Judi Dench's performance in that either.
Yeah, I was gonna say because it had several nominees here, especially for acting.
Right.
So that might be one I try to get to, but that is right now a blind spot. I was just curious if that's one.
Actually, on the subject of best supporting actor or just supporting acting performances in general, I've always really enjoyed Joe Pantoliano's performance in Memento.
Okay.
Again, I don't think it's one of the best of the year, but I like the energy and the playfulness he brings to it. So it's just a highlight there that I think, again, Christopher Nolan, we don't often talk about the sense of humor in his movies. And I think both he and Guy Pearce are bringing a bit of a biting energy to that movie, which I really appreciated.
Absolutely. As far as supporting performances go, I guess we mentioned this in passing when talking about ensemble cast, but the supporting cast of Fellowship, I do think should be noted here more so than just in passing, especially because the movie is called The Fellowship of the Ring. It is about these group of guys coming together.
Yeah.
And they're really great. Like the cast gels together. There's some fascinating dramatic irony at the end of the film that is effective because of the storytelling, but also the performances. Like all of that is necessary.
I thought about that. I know Ian McKellen was nominated for it, and I love his performance in it. Don't get me wrong, but if I were to pick a supporting performance from that movie that I might consider, it might be Sean Bean, honestly.
That's the other one I thought of as well.
Yeah, but then I also thought of maybe Sean Astin, but I mean, really what makes that character and that performance really sell is what we get from him in The Return of the King.
Yes.
And I feel like that would almost be like a premature nomination for him, knowing how great that performance and what that character means for the story later on. It's almost like you're jumping the gun a bit.
I agree, which is why ultimately I went with Ian McKellen because there's this soft, tender quality to him at the beginning. There's a sense of urgency that comes along as the story picks up. And then you get one of the most iconic scenes of all time, let alone fantasy genre movies with them in the mountains. Yeah. So, and he's obviously phenomenal as that character as well.
Right.
So to me, Ian McKellen, I think is maybe him and Sean Bean, I think are both equally the defining supporting performance. As much as I love Sean Astin, especially at the end, he always gives those moments at the end. It's always the end of those moments. You could say the same thing about the middle one too, that huge speech he has. Oh my God.
Yeah, for sure.
So good. But anyway, I just wanted to mention Lord of the Rings because we only mentioned it in passing, but I think it's maybe worthy of bringing up more genuine.
Yeah. And, for how well recognized that movie is, or that whole trilogy is, rather, we don't often talk about the performances as much as we maybe should. We talk about the historical status of those movies, but yeah, we don't often acknowledge the performances, and they are very good for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is all that I have for supporting performances.
I think that's all I have as well.
Okay, so let's move on to supporting actress.
Okay.
Here are my 5. All right. Gwyneth Paltrow, Royal Tenenbaums.
Just nominate that whole movie.
I am. Really. Marisa Tomei in The Bedroom. Laura Haring for Mulholland Drive. Helen Mirren, Gosford Park. Another really good ensemble cast.
Okay.
Which, funny enough, has Harry Potter at the center of it as well.
Yep.
Frances O'Connor, AI, Artificial Intelligence.
Yep.
What's
most of what you have there is what I was really considering for my 5. The first name that came to my mind when doing this list was Frances O'Connor from AI, which means she's probably she is my winner.
I would be shocked. I would have dropped dead on the spot if you went with anyone else for this category. So I'm glad you didn't, because I want to survive.
You know me too well, man. You know me too well.
Died.
Can't kill my co-host.
I would have absolutely died.
Although, I mean, I was almost tempted to give it to Marisa Tomei.
She's great.
I do
Very,
think
very
that's her.
good.
I love her and my cousin Vinny. Don't get me wrong, but I think this is the best performance of her career in the bedroom.
Okay.
So it was hard. It was hard, but as far as a few others, I too have Laura Herring or Haring, I guess is how you pronounce her last name,
Haring,
from Mulholland
yeah.
Drive. And I know you nominated Gwyneth Paltrow from the Royal Tenenbaums. I really like Angelica Houston in that movie as well.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, there's more of a passivity in that performance, but there's this lingering sorrow of feeling almost like abandoned by her former husband. So I think she carries that very well, which sort of gave it a slight edge for me. So I might give her the edge there, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like you can flip a coin between those two, between Houston and Paltrow, and both. Maybe both of them. I'm just gonna throw them both in my nominees.
Fair
here.
enough.
How about that?
Go for it. Yeah, go.
Although,
for it.
I also really like Scarlett Johansson in Ghost World.
I love her as well. She's my number 6 as it stands, and this is
Okay.
another reason that I wanted to be a little bit open-minded, because Angelica Houston, Scarlett Johansson are my 6 and 7, and I could swap out Helen Mirren, who I really do like. What I love about Helen Mirren's performance is the sleight of hand, because throughout a lot of the film, there's a stoicism to the character that I think is fantastic. And you know how I am about stoicism and subtlety.
Oh, for sure.
And then you get the reveal at the end, and all of a sudden that coin is flipped and her performance channels something completely different that I think is really tender and poignant. And I love it. I absolutely love how the film kind of molds that character, and the performance I think is pivotal into that reveal being as effective as it is. So that's why I threw in Helen Mirren there at 5. But I could be swayed by Houston and Scarlett Johansson. Those two are very much in the conversation for me, for sure. No doubt about it.
One name we didn't bring up is who actually won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actress, and that was Jennifer Connelly from A Beautiful Mind, who I think I think is the best thing in that movie.
I agree.
And again, I don't love that movie, but I do overall like it. And where the film is most successful, at least for me, is in its central romance. When it's focused on just being, dare I say, kind of a corny romance, if you want to call it that. I do think there is a wonderful, tender quality to it, mostly because of Jennifer Connelly. I don't think it's her best performance of her career, but I think she's really good in it.
I agree. I think she's really good. The other performance, and I mentioned this earlier because I wasn't sure, but if Penelope Cruz in Vanilla Sky is supporting, then she's probably my 5th, and I'm swapping out Helen Mirren.
Gotcha.
If that's indeed where it lies. Well, I guess I shouldn't say conclusively, but maybe, probably. She's at least she's heavily more in this conversation for me. I just put it that way, because I do think Cruz is phenomenal in that movie.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
My winner, though, is Gwyneth Paltrow, Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay.
I think this is her best performance, and I don't even know if it's close for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah. As I think about it, maybe that is something I can't push back on that much. I mean, yeah, she's very good in it. She's really great in it.
I mean, and trust me, I say that with all the love in my heart for Frances O'Connor, who is very, very good in AI, and probably my number 2 here. Definitely my number 2 here. Yeah, definitely my number 2. Love her.
I'm glad to at least hear that.
But yeah, Tomei, Haring, I don't think those performances are going. Tomei's definitely not going anywhere. Haring, I love her in Mulholland Drive. She's really great. Yeah, I could see a world where I put in Cruz, and I put in maybe a Scarlett Johansson.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
or an Angelica Houston, from Royal Tenenbaums. Yeah. I feel like you just got to nominate every performance from the Royal Tenenbaums, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so the other one
Almost
too,
you did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. The Royal, an all-timer. We'll get to that next week, I guess. The other movie that I thought of here is Fat Girl. So And again, have you seen it?
Still haven't seen it yet.
Still haven't seen it.
That's on my list to
Okay.
lump in at the last minute.
Okay, so the reason I contemplate supporting instead of lead is that although maybe it's the Training Day thing where you have 2 leads, it could be that, or it's the Ocean's 11 thing of they're all supporting. I don't know.
There are no
like
leads.
I couldn't figure out where it all goes because, and the reason I say this, and I guess I don't want to get into it too much, but the film is titled Fat Girl, obviously. So
yeah,
the central performance of the film, and I'm not sure how to say her name, Anais Rabu. I'm probably butchering that.
Yeah. Okay.
At any rate, she is our central character. However, because of how the narrative plays out, in many ways, it's really more about her sister, Alina, played by Roxanne Mesquita. God, I'm butchering that. Please forgive me. At any rate,
Oh, good.
It's really more about Alina in a lot of ways. So even though she is the titular character, she's almost in the backdrop for half of the movie, if not more than that. And so I struggled to figure out, is she supporting or lead? I don't know. I don't think she would crack my 5 as a lead, but if we're thinking about it through the prism of supporting, I could see her being in the fight for one of those 5 there.
Okay.
Really, both of them, honestly. I think both performances are excellent. So those are 2 that I would also consider. I just didn't know where to place them. So, but on my notes here, I had them as supporting because they felt like they were both supporting each other. I don't know. It was kind of weird, but that's where I land.
Yeah.
Anyone else out there listening, maybe you'll be able to tell me one way or another more.
Yeah. I do need to watch this one. It's still on my list. And the way you, I guess, sort of like inadvertently sold it to me, given the sleight of hand that the film presents at the end, just made me so curious about it. And I want to know more. I take it back. I don't want to know any more about it. So I guess leave it at that.
Just watch it. Maybe you'll be able to throw in an opinion there.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. I don't know. The film narratively, though, is more about her sister than it is her. But we see her reaction to these things, which is why the film is that way.
Sure.
But what we see on the surface is less about our central figure. So it makes things a little bit weird in the context of this conversation. As a film, it's great. But when we're talking awards and where to put people, like the labeling is all off.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, those are really my only other thoughts as far as supporting actress goes.
Yeah, I think that's all I think that's all I have for that category as well. I'll just reiterate once again, Frances O'Connor, you make me cry.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
Really, really moving. I mean, one of the things we talked about for this episode, we contemplated also doing best scenes instead of performances.
I am so glad we did not do that.
Because yes, if we're talking about the best scenes of 2001, there is absolutely no doubt, at least for me. I mean, because we could talk about the ending and how great that is as well. But that moment where she drops off Teddy in the woods.
I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the world.
Devastating. Just absolutely heartbreaking in every way. It is phenomenal.
But that's what's so great about her performance in that movie is that she kind of has to give 2 completely different performances between her performance as Monica and then what I'm going to dub as Monica 2.0 by the end. They're not the same character, but they have to be perceived by David as the same character. And that's kind of the film's brilliance in its own way.
Yeah.
She's so great at balancing that.
It's so good. I agree. Maybe we'll talk about it more next week.
We will. Because it's the best movie of the year.
Okay. Well, there it is. All right. Do you have any other thoughts on performances anywhere from 2001? I feel like we've covered the gamut here.
I think we have. Now, I will say there are a few movies that are still blind spots for me that I probably could have referenced a few more things from that I'm willing to plead ignorance on at this point. So, like for instance, Robert Altman's Gosford Park is still a blind spot for me, and that's again we talk about ensemble pieces, right? That movie is absolutely an ensemble
Michael
cast, and
Gambon also
Yep,
should have been nominated.
Maggie Smith was
that movie.
nominated alongside Helen
Yeah.
Mirren. Yeah, so.
yeah. Yeah.
I know you weren't that high on Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher, which I haven't seen yet, but I know a lot of people are and would absolutely cite Isabelle Huppert's performance in that movie as one of her best.
Yeah.
So again, that's ignorant on my part that I still haven't seen that movie yet, but maybe I would fall in that spectrum, and I'm willing to, acknowledge that. So there are still a few that fall into that unfortunate category of I just haven't watched it yet. So or I haven't revisited it yet to have a proper say on whether they would crack my individual top fives here.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly fair. I've watched a lot of films in preparation for next week. I have a few, as I noted earlier, that I still want to get to, but I feel fairly confident about where I stand with my list and really my nominees here for performances. There are a few things I would definitely consider, as I noted, but primarily most of these nominees, if we were doing a full In-Session Film Awards next week, not much of my acting categories would change.
Okay.
I love these performances. A few definitely, again, I would consider, but it was a great year on the whole, as we'll talk about next week. And I think some of these performances are very indicative of it. Like I look at the Royal Tenenbaums, AI, In the Mood for Love. I mean, they were heavily represented in all four of these categories.
Yep.
And for good reason. For very good reason.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some films next week where maybe they weren't quite as heavy represented on this list, but as movies,
they're just dang good. This was a good year. This was a good year. I can't wait to talk about our top fives and top 10s and top 20s from the actual year.
Absolutely.
Maybe we should do a full In-Session Film Awards episode on it.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of work. I don't know if I have that kind of time.
Well, I don't know if we'll do that. However, next year or whenever we get to it, we'll have our 2000 retrospective.
Yep.
And then we'll be able to do best of the decade like we did for the 2010s. I think we can do that.
Oof. That's a daunting task already thinking about that. Ouch.
Yeah. Yep. That was honestly, I loved doing that for the 2010s.
It was so much easier though for some reason. Like I think because these specific years, the 2000s, were so formative for us that it kind of makes it a little bit more challenging. At least it does for me. And we're also getting into films that fall into some of our all-time favorites as opposed to films that we saw a bit later in our film critic sphere, right?
Yeah.
So that does change the perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
And that at least makes it more challenging for me.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I don't know because the 2010s were formative for me, but in a different way. So I don't know if there's much of a distinction for me. I mean, the 2000s, excuse me, was absolutely formative for the reasons you're talking about. I mean, I started, I was going into high school in the year 2000.
Right.
So at that time, I was very much in the middle of formatting my identity, and I had just started getting into films at that time. And so as I got into college in the mid 2000s, I was really starting to think through, my identity as a film nerd, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then when I got into the 2010s and then I started doing in-session film and doing this more critically and analytically, then I became a different person entirely from who I was in the 2000s.
Same here.
As a film fan and critic.
That's fair.
So I feel like both decades were formative, just in different ways. And, that's, I think, what's exciting. What will be really different for me, I think, will be the 90s. Because,
oh my gosh,
we experienced that as kids.
Yeah.
And then going back and looking at those films as adults and as critics is going to be just a completely wildly different.
That one's going to be potentially heartbreaking because we may come across even more films where we have this kind of reaction to, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, that was a great movie from my childhood. Oh no, it doesn't hold up anymore.
which some of that has happened already.
Yeah, but I feel like that might happen more with the 90s for us.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And I think we have to be prepared for that. There's no doubt about it.
Or it could work the other way. We might, rediscover certain childhood films that actually get better with time for us.
Yeah. Well, it's going to
be fun.
It's going to be fun to experience that too, because, and obviously we're working backwards, but the 90s was so interesting in terms of like where the early 90s, where film was at that time. And then you get the beginning of independent cinema in the early 90s and how that evolved Hollywood into where it was by the time we get to the late 90s. So we're going to experience that in
reverse order. Yeah, because we're gonna see the transformativeness or the transformation.
We'll see the results at the end. We'll do that first.
we're gonna basically do this like Memento, right?
Exactly. We're gonna Christopher Nolan this, Tarantino it, however you want to label it.
Yep. I love it.
Should be a lot of fun. I think with that we can go ahead and wind down here, unless you have anything else.
All right, I think that's it.
My last thought, while we're simply talking about the 2000s on the whole, and then we can wind down the show here. So we're getting ready to do the new John Carney film. That's coming down the road here very soon. And in preparation for that, I just was going through some John Carney clips. And I of course tweeted this out if you follow us on Twitter, but I went and revisited some of the clips from Once and was going through the falling slowly scene, and
so good.
I cannot be like, I watched it like 37 times. I was giddy the whole time. It was like if you're a sports fan and you watch your favorite sports team, and when they score or do something great in a big moment in a big game, and you absolutely lose it. That's what the feeling was for me. Like watching that scene again, like I was erupting with just pure joy and elation. Just love that movie so much and love that scene.
And the music store owner behind his desk, just
so good.
That little moment of acknowledgement he makes, like that's, as a musician myself, that's what you want to see. That's the validation you need right there. It's so tender and so heartwarming.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Yeah. And one of the best Oscar wins of all time, regardless of category, as far as I'm concerned.
For sure.
All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and wind down for this week. Once again, thank you to our patrons. We cannot do this without you. Your support goes a long way. We really do appreciate you all. If you want to help out the show, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. You can sign up there for as low as $1 a month. And we have a bunch of rewards up there. And we have exclusive Patreon content that we put up there every single week for you all.
Yep.
This week was a ton of fun because we talked about ghost stories.
Yeah.
It was great. It was a great time.
Not movie ghost stories.
Not
literal ghost stories.
Real ghost stories as it relates to
We had a campfire
life.
set up and everything, and the documentary is going to be made on it. Yeah, just wait for that.
Exactly. So go and check all of that out. Again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. Reviews. We'll have a review for Kenneth Branagh's new film, A Haunting in Venice. That's coming out very soon. We'll also have a review for Pablo Larraín's new film, El Conde. That is up on Netflix as well. So that's coming up. And pretty soon, the new Carney is coming out. I don't know when Brendan and I will get to Flora in the Sun, but we'll get to that soon as far as podcast reviews go.
Yep.
Another one that's coming down the pipeline here in a couple weeks is Craig Gillespie's Dumb Money. We'll have a podcast review of that coming soon, but I have seen it and have a video review up on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
So if you want to go and check that out at youtube.com/InSessionFilm. Women in Session. Be sure to check out the latest episode of that. Zeta and Christina, they talk about their favorite Italian movies. Of course, they talk about Italian neorealism as much.
Oh, for sure.
And other movies from Italy. So you can go and check that out. Really great show. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. So you can hit us up: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. Whatever.
Blue Sky, still a thing.
Yeah, I think so. I'm on there.
Okay.
And with Elon announcing what he did today,
it's going to become more of a thing. Yeah, you're right.
It's going to become more of a thing. Yeah. So Threads, Blue Sky, because no one will be on Twitter very soon if he's going to force people to pay for it.
I love how we still call it Twitter, even though it's not what it's called anymore.
It's Twitter. X, Twitter, whatever. Anyway, hit us up there. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff. You can interact with us here on YouTube as well. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We really do appreciate that. I know we really haven't harped on that as much in recent weeks and months, but
yeah, sure.
Those reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify really help out the show.
They do.
We really do appreciate that.
Yep.
Anything else? I believe that is it, Brendan.
I think that is it. I'm tired. I'm ready to go to bed. Once again, a major congrats to my good friend Brian on his wedding, marrying his lovely now wife, Erin. The story of how they met is destined to become a Hallmark movie. It really is. I might have to write it. I'll just simply leave it at that. I might give more details on like a Patreon episode or something, but it's finally nice to see that they are tying the knot, literally speaking, and it was a wonderful ceremony. I was so glad to be part of it.
That is really great to hear. Always love beautiful wedding stories.
Yeah.
We'll have another one coming up here in just a few weeks.
Yeah, I heard about that.
I know someone that's getting married soon.
Yeah, so do I.
We'll talk about that soon.
I hear he's kind of annoying, but we'll see.
I don't know about annoying. The only thing annoying is that it's during football season, which should not be allowed.
Tough.
Why is that, Brendan?
Tough. Because October weddings are the greatest. That's why. Because they're perfect for photos.
They're perfect for photos. Okay.
Oh, come on. A fall wedding is where it's at, man. That's the beauty.
No, I avoid fall weddings.
Oh,
most of
that's
the
the
time.
best.
If it wasn't you, I would not go.
Oh, how dare you?
No, I'm sorry. I got too much going on. But for you, I'll do it.
Okay, well, I appreciate
Thankfully,
it.
Michigan is just playing Indiana, so it shouldn't be too much.
That's
of
nothing.
A,
they might just air that on Peacock because it means nothing.
They probably will. You're probably not wrong about that. Final thought for me. So for those watching us on the YouTube, this little poster right here behind me is coming out on Criterion.
Yeah, same artwork and everything. That beautiful artwork.
And that's honestly why I wanted to bring it up. I thought it was really funny because usually Criterion has their own posters that are unique to them. Mm-hmm. And I love that they simply took the same artwork and just plastered their name on it. Criterion.
It's probably they thought, like, we're not going to get any better than this.
Yeah, it's like, this is perfect. Let's just keep it.
Yeah.
Just love that. I don't know. Maybe there were some legalities with Netflix about it. I don't know.
Maybe they had to buy the rights. I don't know.
But assuming that they had the opportunity to change it and they just didn't, I thought that was great.
I think it's great. Yeah.
Anyway, with all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. I need these ghosts to go away, Brendan.
Call Gene Hackman.
Ghost hunt. Ghostbusters.
There
That's
you
what
go.
I'm going to call.